We're recording this just before we record or have a go at recording the second of these. But there's something we realised that we've completely forgot to do. Well, there's two things we forgot to do. One is to acknowledge where we're recording this. So we're not a startup. We're not a division of a publishing company. We're not... Actually, I work for an academic institution, but we're not representing that. We're sat in my kitchen.
Yeah.
And that means the acoustics are going to be odd, and you're going to sound like you're in a kitchen. And at some point, we might do one of these in the study, because I have a study.
Yeah, and that one will sound like we're in a study and not in a studio, because we will be in the study.
We'll be in a study. But yeah, I think it's an admission and a kind of acknowledgement that this is two people talking over a kitchen table and trying to put some things into some kind of listenable, I won't say permanent form, but a listenable form that makes sense. But the thing that we did forget to do was actually introduce ourselves. So we're gonna bolt this bit on to the front of the first one, although Baldur might edit that out because it'll make no sense when you do it.
I might keep it in just to make you sound like a crazy person.
Like a completely crazy person, yes. But I think you should go first.
Oh, fuck. I think we can, we can forget about this being a family-friendly show already. Yes, my name is Baldur Bjarnason, or if you want to pronounce that the Icelandic way, Baldur Bjarnason. You're never going to get that right, not unless you're raised in Iceland. And how do I introduce myself? That's bloody hell.
What is it you do and why are you doing this?
Well, I make ebooks, or basically I make systems that make ebooks. That's what I do at the moment. But generally speaking, if we want to pull back a bit and talk about more of what I do, as in capital words, is that I try to figure out better ways for people to make digital things. That's basically my goal. I used to be in web development, and that meant working with content management systems and helping people figure out better ways of making their websites. Now I'm working for in the publishing industry for publishing people and trying to figure out better ways for them to make their things. I've got a scary, like Tom, I've got a scary long history of actually working on these things. Being middle-aged and having spent 20 years working sort of in this field and related to this field, it means that I'm probably, if I sound I probably have gotten beyond the Dunning-Kruger effect by now, probably just barely, but it also means that we're quite aware of the fact that most of the things we're saying we're going to be proven wrong at some point, because everybody's wrong about everything, really.
On that note, being wrong about everything, really. So I'm Tom Abba. My bio says I'm an academic and I'm a writer. I'm an associate professor in art and design at the University of West of England in Bristol. Like Baldur, we've been working in this field or related bits of field for at least, I think, 15 years and probably going on longer.
Yeah.
And been interested in kind of what this is and what this becomes. I'm director of a company called Circumstance, co-director of a company called Circumstance, who make experiences. We deal with books, we work with books quite a lot, and we're making some interesting things we think are interesting in sort of digital physical interaction and making small pieces with writers. But mostly what we do is what we call a narrative of experience, so often big public scale work that borrows from literary form, borrows from cinematic form, but actually makes it something that feels like we made it just for you. I'm a book designer. I'm interested in the tactility, the physicality of the book, and interested in where that goes and what we can do with it. So yeah, if that kind of does a little scene setting, you can find us both on the web. The interwebs. We both tweet. He tweets more than I do, I think.
People have accused me of over tweeting.
Yes. So Baldur is
fake Baldur.
On Twitter, and I am Tom Abba on Twitter, but from there you will find other things that we tweet under and that we prescribe, and we've both got a varied web presence in a variety of ways. Okay, so that was introductions, and now we're going to stop this, and you'll hear this at the beginning, and then we'll go on to number 2.
So what are we supposed to call this goddamn thing? We can ask that. Well, maybe we should ask that again without some swearing.
No, I think you should keep the swearing in.
Yeah, it's swear worthy.
The swearing is for the audience. I don't know, because you proposed this as the first title. What do we call this?
Yeah.
And although it seemed a little glib, the more I thought about it, actually, you do have a real point, because one of the bugbears of working in this particular bit of the field is that everybody talks about it as being the future of the book. What do you call it thing? Every subheading, every sub thing on a title, everything starts with X is the future of the book, Y is the future of the book, this is the future of publishing, and one of the things that I think is completely true about that is that we have no idea what the future of the book is. And we don't have a clue what the future of publishing is going to look like, other than I think you and I probably share maybe a preconception, maybe a devoted religious idea that it's not what it looks like now.
Yeah, but I think that's a very safe bet. It's sort of like, pretty much the only really safe bet that you can make about climate change is the fact that the weather will not be like it is now, and it won't be like it was when your grandparents were growing up.
But the trouble with doing that, and just to pick on, because I'm in a wordy mood today, to pick on kind of the metaphor of it's a safe bet, is that the thing with a bet is that you place odds on a horse or odds on an event happening. When that event happens, then there is a defined thing. There is that this horse won, this person was elected to this post, this whatever else, and that there's a date and a time attached to that. And you're absolutely right that a safe bet is that it won't look like it looks like now, but no one's ever going to pay us the money. Because there is no defined point at which you're going to turn around in 2020 and go, well, that's obviously changed, and that's changed. So I think just because I think dwelling on the name and dwelling on what we call it sounds self-obsessive and sounds kind of so up our own arses that it's ridiculous. But on the other hand, there is a frame around that what we call this thing does set a kind of tone as to what we're trying to do. And for me, I think anything that talks about the future of the book, the future of publishing, is so riven with instantly the politics of it and instantly the inbuilt resistance, because you are proposing that what people are doing is somehow wrong, and I don't think that's what we're doing. But we're trying to say that there is maybe another interesting way to do this. There are other ways to think about this, and the trouble it's the same argument, which I'm sure we're going to get to at some point, about interactive media and choose your own adventure. See podcast number 44 where Tom rants for 4 hours, but that becomes the conversation.
Yeah. Now but there are two things three things. First note is that for those listeners out there, the knocks that you hear on a regular basis is Tom hammering the table for emphasis. It's not a bad thing. It's sort of, but it's without the visual reference, you might not recognise it for what it is. But the first response to that I have is, Nicholas Nassim Taleb, the very popular philosopher / economist / investor, opinionator par excellence. He makes a lot of, like most modern philosophers, they make a lot of the points he makes are complete nonsense. A lot of them are exceedingly on point and relevant. The one of the ones I like is that you can almost always trust. You have more trust in the judgment of somebody who has skin in the game than somebody who doesn't. And so, if somebody's making a prediction on how things go, you can usually trust their prediction more if you see that that's the way they've bet their career. If the prediction pans out in a different way, then that will negatively impact the career. If you look at that's why a futurist is such an oxymoron. There are people whose job it is to make predictions with no consequences. But a person who is working in a field,
they're called analysts, aren't they?
Analysts. Consultants, analysts. But a person who's working in the field and say, this is the way I think things are going, and they follow that up with actually making bets in terms of the careers, the projects they choose to do. In that area, then generally speaking, that is less of a bullshitty statement than the one you get from futurists. So, in terms of this, if you look at what we're doing, on the one hand, you've been doing a lot of the projects that you've been doing with Duncan and of Circumstance, which are they are pretty much the definition of pure of things that you can only do in digital. There's no way you can get away with doing even remotely what you've been doing just in analog or just in something else. At the same way, I'm betting pretty firmly on the idea of programmability and development and basically digital media. And so it's sort of in a ways that that's kind of the reason why we like to are struggling to why it's so important for us to try and figure out a decent name to frame this, because we're framing we're trying to put a label on where we're betting what we're betting our careers on. It's like a high stakes naming game. It's sort of like it's like the Klondike gold diggers trying to figure out what we're going to actually call this thing. And if you end on Gold Rush and
well, that's true. And there are two things that come to mind. One is you're absolutely right, and so I suppose on the one hand, one of the things this comes down to for us, and this is not what I'm saying, is do as we do, don't do as we say. And I think you're absolutely right. One of the things that's defined yours and my kind of working relationship and friendship over the years is that we disagree more than we agree all the time. But actually, when you get under the skin of disagreement, actually we're talking the same language. We're trying to figure something out that is complementary in a way, even though we might approach things differently and we might kind of get obsessed with something and run away. The other problem, and this is more the Klondike thing and the Gold Rush, is and it's also about futurism, and this is something I used to talk to students a lot about, is that it's bear with me here. It's very postmodern to talk about postmodernism.
Sort of self-involved theories is pretty much a postmodern invention.
It's a postmodern invention, and yes, the early futurists called themselves futurists. That all the art movements of the early 20th century defined themselves and put a kind of a manifesto around what they were doing and started to say that. But
they defined themselves in terms of their work and in trying to put labels on their actual work. Postmodernism defines itself from. Basically, from the discussion, from it's a label of a kind of discourse rather than an art form.
It's very hard to say. It's very easy to say this is a postmodern piece of work, or this is a piece of work that exists in a postmodern context. But then, when you try to actually define what that postmodern thing is, often what you're doing is describing something that's in opposition to something else, that it's fighting against something. And you're completely right that the modernist art movements, modernist literary movements, define themselves by the work. They say, look, this is what I'm doing. I'm not that B.S. Johnson who did this, but this is a body of work that arises out of one man's career. This is Mark Supporter's composition number one. This is X or Y or Z, and this in some way embodies a set of principles, which I suppose, in that respect, are we talking about the avant-garde?
Oh, in terms of what we're doing, or
I don't. I think it's a weird label to apply to yourself. It's a very kind of like, I'm going to stand on a pedestal and go, this is what we're doing. It's avant-garde and it's so amazing and you're going to love it.
I think it's applicable in terms of the work that you do.
But I think that's very kind of you to say. But I think maybe actually what we're interested in is defining that space for the book and publishing. And the relationship between print and digital and what that might be. Is that I think I'm less interested in an absolute, in this is what it's going to be, because my first reaction every time someone asks me to talk about the future of publishing is to say, actually, you want to talk about a future. This isn't the future, this is a future, this is one of billions of possible futures of any possible doorway you could walk through and a way of dealing with your business or your practice or your writing, whatever those things might be, and it's not the future. And that kind of acceptance that this is slippery and this is in motion and this is very hard to pin down, I think is probably fundamental to what I'm interested in, because it means that I can look excitingly at games. I can look at other things and look at a whole set of things that I might not be very interested in making or even playing or taking more than a kind of academic interest in, but I'm interested in what's being done because it seems that they're kind of carving some territory out. They're doing something that is not satisfied with what's gone before, that sees as a different way to do it, that sees that there is a way to work with story or with structure or with form or content, which is going to come again and again and again, or any of those things, but starts to define something new. And that for me is maybe not that I think what what I do is avant-garde, but what I'm interested in, the work that gets me excited and interested and kind of inspired and sitting and having long conversations with people, is the stuff that's consciously trying to do something new, that's trying to No,
I mean, it strikes me as the same sort of relationship as you had with, especially in the sort of early days of the novel, that novelists had with poetry and drama. As in, they're clearly different things. I mean, it's sort of, you can't, a play is a different sort of experience from a novel, and the poetry as well. But there's so much that novels could learn from it, like the act structure of the play, as a form of controlling the sort of the dramatic arc of a story, or just the pure wordplay of poetry. And there's the same sort of interaction between digital storytelling and games, as in the games, the sort of ludology, the sort of interactive feedback loops that throw you, basically give you cues for what sort of response you're supposed to have and what sort of action you're supposed to take. It seems like me, they are hints towards of something like the act structure of digital. That digital storytelling can learn from that in the same way that novelists learn from drama, but without wholesale going into the let's make a game, because that, if you go that route, you end up discovering that probably the best way to do a game is to minimize story, and the story can add a dimension to games, but it's never going to be the point and purpose of a game. So if you go that way, you end up really, it's like decided to do to write a novel, and then studying drama to such an extent that you basically just write a play.
I think you're right. I think before we go any further, we should apologise in case Naomi Oldham is listening. Naomi, I stand by nothing that Baldur said. I think you're brilliant, and whereas you and I may differ on some opinions, games are absolutely story, and are absolutely kind of ways. And no, because Naomi gave a keynote at Kate Pullinger's conference Mix 3 in Bath, which I couldn't make. I spoke at it, but I couldn't make Naomi's keynote. That was labelled as, and I forget exactly what the title was, but it was Naomi's kind of staking out a territory on this is what digital storytelling, interactive storytelling is. And when I read the notes and I read the slide deck and I looked back, absolutely Naomi talks about games, because where Naomi's interested in where she comes from. And I think probably I'm more with you on digital storytelling, using digital to tell stories and to think about what books might be and how we deal with that has an awful lot to learn from games. But I probably don't put myself in the camp that games are it. Games are the answer to all of this, because it seems that they do games, they do a game mechanic very well. And absolutely games are story. Games have story in them. Games are
it's just
storied experiences.
But my point was more that it's more about the priorities. Is that if a games author ever is put in a situation where he needs to make a decision, a design decision, of whether to where it has two choices. One choice is to penalise the story to make a better gameplay feedback loop, or to penalise the gameplay feedback loop to deliver a better story. They're almost always. If you're making a game, the right decision is almost always going to be to slightly penalise story over the game.
That's probably true, and it's probably true in only that we're looking at this as binary oppositions, as you can have one or the other. I think you can have both, and I think that we're going to get, one hopes we get letters, outraged emails, tweets saying no, there is this, there is this. I think that's absolutely
true.
And
also, it's a bit hypocritical because of me to use that, because I've frequently railed against the idea of using too many binary oppositions in our analysis. Anyway,
well, absolutely, yeah, but
bad.
You're bad, but at some point we've got to start. This is the point of this half hour, 45 minutes, whatever it's going to be, is to try and define what we're going to call this damn thing. That at some point we've got to start saying it's not this, or it's this, or it's this. And maybe, I think where we are broadly is that games have a phenomenal amount to offer as ways of understanding engagement, and ways of understanding how readers behave and how a reader might behave when confronted with a different form of a thing. But it's not that's the answer that we're looking for. That we're looking for something else.
So basically this is not a game.
Oh, don't. Just let's not have that phrase. But that's just that. There's a klaxon going to go off somewhere. It's like I was in the Pervasive Media studio. That's the first mention for the PM studio. Hello, Claire. someone said transmedia, and I had this little moment where there should be a klaxon going off every time someone says transmedia or embodied gaming or something. There are buzzwords, and yet this is not a game. Just has become one of those phrases that that in terms of alternate reality gaming became something that it was never designed to be. It became a kind of way of describing an experience that was not written in. I mean, okay, here's my take on it. That this is not a game becomes a way of thinking about something that this is reality. This is somehow not a game. It's not removed from your everyday life. It is part of your life, and the reality of your experience in this 3.5 months of ARGing experience is that it's not a game because it's you. And my understanding, talking to Sean Stewart about this several years ago, is that actually that this is not a game thing arose because they didn't want to use game mechanics.
Oh, okay. That's a bit of a self-inflicted handicap.
And they wanted to make something that had more literary ambition, more story ambition. Obviously, and yes, that comes back to the kind of binary problem that we just mentioned, but then it's been adopted as a kind of mantra for the reality of it, the subsuming of everyday life the game into, or the structure rather, into everyday life. And yes, anyway, so this is not a game. No, it's not a game. But you did, one of the reasons for doing this podcast, however long we do them for, we could be like Radiolab or Komodo Mayo and go on forever and ever and ever and never stop or take holiday. We take holidays and have someone else do it. Is that we have a book, and we have a book that we have written that tries to set some of this down, if not on paper, in words that make sense in sentences and paragraphs and occasionally pages. And one of the original title for that was "This Is Not a Book."
Yeah.
When we first drafted this out, and you mentioned earlier, we sat there in a studio that will go nameless because it's already got a mention already once, and with lots of sheets of paper, and just did a kind of storyboard, sketchbook skeleton of the whole thing, of how the whole thing might work. And it was called "This Is Not a Book."
Yeah.
And that title suited it for a long time in its kind of early versions and its kind of sort of proto-gestation of where it was going to go. And I remember very clearly the email that when we said, okay, now we're going to sit down and write it, and it has to be this thing, and it has to be whatever else, and this is how we're going to do it. Hence now. That you completely reframed the title. And you threw this title into the kind of email conversation, and it just went, actually, that makes a lot more sense.
What was that again? What did I say? That was so clever. I can't remember it now.
You said it's not called "This Is Not a Book," it's called "This Is a Book, comma, for now."
Yeah, I remember now.
And actually, that kind of... I don't believe in bolts out of the blue moments. Actually, I do believe in bolts out of the blue moments. They're brilliant. But it kind of went, okay, that's actually what we're trying to do. We're not trying... And this comes back to my resistance to determining a future for anything.
Yeah.
And preferring to think about the present, or where the present can go, and the present in 5 minutes, 15 minutes, 2 years, whatever else it might be. But saying actually what we're interested, what that book is fundamentally interested in, is trying to describe a landscape and trying to do some mapping and do some, hopefully, we hope, some useful mapping and some useful architecture around which you can build your response, your business, your career, your writing, your design, whatever those things might be. We're saying, these are the things that we understand, these are the things that we keep talking about, and let's put them down. But it made a lot more sense to say, this is a book for now.
Yeah.
Rather, in all of it, those double meanings, triple meanings, rather than say, this is not a book. Which suddenly felt kind of...
It was better to... It was more descriptive than the intentionally ironic statement that the first title had become.
Yes.
And then, of course, we had to go and completely mess that up by changing everything and doing something else.
Yeah, that's true, obviously, yes. And it's not even a book at the moment. It's a collection of pages.
Well, no, it's called This Is Not a Book, because it isn't.
Is it called This Is Not a Book?
Well, that's what I put on the website.
Really?
Yeah, didn't notice.
No. Okay. Right.
Yeah,
okay.
I changed that deliberately when I made it into the website.
Right.
So,
well, then that's fine, because...
Which is going to be confusing, because, we're going to make the book version, that's called This Is a Book for Now, and the website version is This Is Not a Book. Yeah.
That's not confusing at all. That's perfectly sensible. If anyone is confused by that, they can email and tell us. I think that makes absolute abundant sense to you and me, and hopefully to anybody reading and listening.
Well, one thing that you talked about earlier is that the discussion of the one future of many. I mean, there are sort of basically two things. We're discussing the description in the book that we're describing the present of a field, as in this is the way things are now. But the other thing I wanted to point out is that, which I think I'm pretty sure I pointed this out somewhere on the book, in the book in writing text, thing with words, is that sort of you can't disrupt a medium or an art form. You can disrupt the companies that produce media or art,
Sure.
but the medium or the art form is a community. It's an abstract thing that can't be disrupted in business terms. The companies may go away. Like most of the early radio companies disappeared once film and TV pushed them out, but radio's still a huge thing. It's just changed. The medium changes and adapts. The companies may go and get disrupted, but the medium is like an organic thing.
So what you're saying, I suppose, is, I mean, you're much more familiar with this term than I am, because you've got...
It's a bullshit economy term. It just happens to be useful in certain contexts, in certain discussions.
I mean, actually, because you've got the patience to read the books, which I haven't got the patience to read those books. And Clayton Christensen. And I guess, so is what you're saying is that, because, yes, disruption as a term gets bandied around an awful lot, and it's become another one of those kind of things that you'll talk about at conferences, and they pay 300 quid to go and hear people explain what disruption is going to mean.
300 quid if you're lucky.
If you're lucky, yes. We were in the wrong business. Stupidly, whenever this podcast goes on the road and we start having conferences, we're going to charge you 400 quid.
Easy.
Yeah, or 200 quid.
500.
200 quid if you can prove that you listened to the first one. Anyway, but the disruption is something that happens to business, not that happens to a medium.
Yeah, I mean, disruption, especially in terms of it's described.
But
the way that Clayton describes it is describes it as entirely an economic phenomenon.
Yeah,
he almost describes it basically as a management phenomenon. So it's kind of, because a medium isn't something that's it's not an organisation. It's not even an economy. It's generated. It's created as a part of an economy, but it isn't an economy in and of itself. So I don't think the term is actually applicable to the medium, but I'm pretty sure that people would disagree with me. Probably especially economists who think that everything is basically defined in terms of business.
Yeah, no, but I want to just dwell on that for a moment, because I think one of the things that gets lost in all of that, and not all of your rant, but all of the kind of the way that disruption gets applied, is that people talk about disrupting the book, or disrupting reading, or disrupting the reader's experience or something. And actually, if we are talking about that, you're not going to change the book. You're not going to change what books do. You're not going to change the way those. And actually, any attempt to do that is kind of, I won't say fundamentally flawed or broken or whatever else. But there's something that I wrote. Future book asked for a manifesto in 500 words for the future of the book, which was great, brilliant, marvellous. Okay, that's not what I want to write, but I wrote this thing. And I think you picked on one thing I'd said. I'm going to try and find it now because I have a laptop in front of me. Okay, here we are. Yeah, so this is about the third paragraph when I stopped rhyming. I tried to do a Kate Tempest thing. Okay, digital is old. Digital is new and it is old. It remakes and remediates. It is new content and it can be old content, but it's capable of things that print cannot do, and it cannot do what print can. And then the next thing I wrote was, get it through your heads. It cannot do what print can. That's what print is for. And that, for me, kind of, not that I don't say that sums up something or sums up a kind of problem, but one of my little moments of constant frustration and constant annoyance is not the ebook as a thing. The ebook as a thing is an amazingly useful thing, and it's a wonderful. But the idea that that's the answer, that somehow is good enough, that's actually what we've got, and then suddenly, and I know you spend an awful lot of time swearing at people,
and
in terms of standards, in terms of production standards, and what's possible and what's not possible. And for me, it does come more down to, it is a book under glass. It is, as John Clute observed to me 2 or 3 years ago, it's a parody of a book. It's a thing that if you have a Kindle, people talk a lot about Kindles, and there's a joke about the Kindle is heavier when you put more books on it. If you take more books off it, your Kindle is somehow lighter, which I think that's kind of quaint. That's a lovely thing. But however, one thing you can do a test at home for this. If whatever time you go to bed, just make a thing where you come downstairs at 3 a.m. and go into your study or into your room, wherever your Kindle is, and just don't turn the lights on and listen really carefully. And what you'll hear is the sound of your Kindle crying itself to sleep every night. because it wants to be, all the content on it wants to be real books. It's been hived. This is my thing about it. It's been hived off from the production process of making a book. That you know this more than I do, but and everybody listening to does know this. That in terms of the production process for 90%, 99% of e-text, then at some point an InDesign file is truncated away from the production process.
I just feel pain.
Yeah, absolutely.
At the mere mention of the word InDesign.
Yeah, or whatever file format, and let's not.
It's always going to be. It's always InDesign.
It's always InDesign, or it's a Word document. God help us. Or it's Scrivener.
Word's actually a lot easier.
Really?
Oh yeah, massively easier.
God, no one's ever going to say that. And please, someone just underline and record that. Word is a lot easier. That's just a sentence I know. But it's that. The book carries on. I mean, you're going to hear tapping. The book carries on, and at some point, the print edition is going to get made. The print edition is going to be a lovely thing, one hopes. And at some point, then, at the same moment, the e-edition gets kind of hived off, and the e-edition is that same thing. It's exactly the same thing, but it apparently has bells and whistles. It has things in it. It has things it can do. But basically, it's a copy under glass. It's a copy of the thing that you can very crudely mark up. You can very crudely, and yes, there are things you can do in terms of sharing annotation, sharing bookmarks, and the social aspect of it. But fundamentally, for me, there is something incredibly special about sharing. Okay, this is going to sound a bit romantic and a bit weird, but sharing a book with another living person. And I've been doing this. This is not a response to Abrams and Dorst's S, of which more at another point. But the idea that annotating books is something I never used to do. I never used to annotate in books. I used to write in books. I found that for my PhD, there are still books in the study here and at work that have got post-it notes stuck in them. And I wrote on the post-it notes. I didn't want to write in the book itself.
Yeah, same here.
And I found that whole thing a little bit weird. And I've just started doing it because there's a piece of work I'm making at the moment that is drawing from, in a weird way, a set of short stories by an Argentinian writer who is not Borges, just because I thought we'll look at someone different now. But that book is being passed back between two people and being written on and underlined and little notes made on it. And I find that kind of idea that you're sharing something with a living person really interesting, and you're seeing their marks. There would be something interesting about seeing everybody else's comments on the same text, but I'm not. Yeah. I want to see what they write. Yeah. I'm not interested in necessarily what everybody else writes. I want that kind of shared thing.
Well, it's going to sound like a book. Yeah, this is going to sound a little bit like a meander, but bear with me. Mm-hmm. There is a long-standing idea of the book as an artifact that's a signifier for a larger thing. Yeah. As in a signifier for a topic or a social discussion of a topic. Yeah. There's an article by Ivan Illich, the sort of radical educationist, where he described in, I think about 1980 or 81, he described the idea of installing Apple IIs in local libraries everywhere. Now, people could go on them and write down, basically, I want to talk about this book. And, there'd be a list of books, and you could look at the list of books and click, okay, here's a group of people who want to talk about that book, and here's where they're meeting. And the way that you basically organise it is that you'd show up in a coffee house or in the library and basically demonstrate the book, and that was sort of your entry. And the idea there is that it's... And the point that he was making with this is that it's almost impossible to get people to talk about abstract concepts. You can't get people to talk about socialism. What you can do is you can get them to talk about Das Kapital, or Trotsky's writing, or you can get them to talk about 1984 or Animal Farm. Books are like a physical representation of abstract concepts in physical form, and in the same way that the misunderstanding that modern education has on the role of textbooks is that if you look at how universities have used textbooks throughout the years, until about 30, 40 years ago, they didn't use textbooks as, receptacles that poured information from the textbook into your head. Yeah. They used them as signifiers for discourse. Yeah. They said, here's Arthur Quiller Kirch's, textbook on writing. And it wasn't that, his words were the word of God on how to write. They were always set there as a topic for discussion, and the way you'd learn was basically the group would discuss it. And the question of that we have now is that role has split off into two. You can talk about the book and use the book as a representation for a topic in a completely abstract way without the artifact.
Yeah.
But you can also still use the artifact as sort of a coordination for physical interaction and markup and annotation, and becoming a unique, like a physical manifestation of the interactions of a group.
Yeah.
And those two things are kind of diverse. It's that we don't talk about books, we don't in person. We don't talk about books in person anymore. We talk about them online now. It's sort of almost no. It's very few people do book clubs anymore.
I think
compared to what they did before. I mean, most people go on Goodreads.
They do, and I think the danger in what you've just described. And I'm with you. I was with you on everything. I was kind of nodding away, and right until the point where you said people don't use book clubs. And I think actually they do. They do an awful lot more.
Yeah.
There's an awful lot more book clubbing,
yeah.
Which is now a word apparently in my head, than necessarily was present 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. I think that it's a huge thing.
That's cool, actually.
And it's weirdly one of the things that I've noticed in the last 2 or 3 years. I mean, yeah, the Oprah book club, the Oprah kind of discussion of books began, and if your book
and Zuckerberg.
Zuckerberg in the last 2 or 3 months. Radio 2 have been doing something.
Oh, cool.
I mean, this is Simon Mayo's second reference in this podcast, but May used to do something on Radio 5 where they would bring an author in and talk about a book, and then when he went to Radio 2, they started doing the same thing. And it's in a weird way, post Richard and Judy, post Oprah, it's one of the things I've noticed in terms of conversations with publishing and publishers. It's a real way to get your book visible and get it talked about. Yeah. And I think maybe that book club notion, I think there are still book clubs. I think, yes, possibly book clubs as a thing that you do where basically you end up getting pissed on white wine, has possibly fallen by the wayside. I think there is as much discussion about a book, but it's a discussion that's being curated in a way by another organisation, by somebody who is interested in literature or interested in publishing or interested in something.
Yeah, or interested in selling stuff.
Absolutely interested in selling stuff. But yeah, so I think that still goes on. And I guess just picking up on what you said, what suddenly strikes me as interesting is, and it's back to that kind of confluence of the academic purpose and the academic abstraction of a book, is that at the end of that, you still had a book that had been written in. You had a book that your experience of that book was a pattern of usage, a set of things about that marked your involvement, and that whether they were dog-eared pages, whether they were folded things back, whether they were notes in the margins. And yeah, I've got second-hand textbooks, God bless books that are like that, and they're fascinating, they're brilliant. And I think maybe one thing that, because I started this ranting about, or doing the John Clute thing about ebooks being a parody of a book and you can hear your Kindle cry itself to sleep every night, is that's just something you can turn on and turn off.
Yeah.
And you can still, there is apparently, so people in marketing tell us, there is something intoxicating about having, the fresh virgin copy of your digital file, and you can turn off all this kind of extra clutter. And I like the extra clutter. If that's what that book is there to do, I kind of want to see the extra clutter. I don't want, because that's part of my experience of the thing. It's part of my relationship to the book as a physical phenomenon, as a thing that I have. I mean, this is a different kind of topic of conversation, but I think it's Umberto Eco someone remarks about Eco that libraries are an act of vanity. Mm-hmm. A personal library is an act of vanity. And there's a story told about Eco that a student comes to him, I'm going to do a very bad Italian accent now, and says, "Oh, professore, all these books on your shelves, you've read all these books," and Eco looks at him and goes, "No." And the student looks a bit downcast because he expects Eco to have, Eco is Eco.
Erudite person.
Eco is definitely erudite. But you've read everything, the whole thing to be there. And he goes, no, these are the books I want to read.
Yeah.
These are the books. And there's something about putting a marker down and saying, and it is about vanity, but it is also about the physicality of the thing that I think gets lost in the discussion of digital as an ebook. That there's something really important about the thing you have in your hand. And the thing you have a relationship to that object, and that object then having a history. I have no history with any of the That's not true. I have some history of some of the e-texts sat on my iPad. I know when I bought. I know who recommended them to me. But I don't have the same history with. We could walk into the study, 20 feet from here, and I could tell you the story of why I bought almost every single book in there.
Yeah.
And some of them are recommendations. Some of the things, there was a conversation with somebody and they said, have you read this? And I realised, no, I haven't, and then went and bought a copy. And it may not have been read, and it may be read in 2 years' time or on a plane. But there is something about, though, that...
Well, it's
the heft and the physicality and the thingness of it.
I mean, it's one of those things that... this actually, I'm going to... This is a well-researched phenomenon in that our memory is based on physicality. That's part of the reason why we actually remember things a lot better that we read in a physical book than we do in ebooks.
Okay.
Because we automatically map things onto objects.
Yeah.
So that's the reason why when you've read a book and you're trying to remember where you read something, you can actually sort of guess relatively where in the book just by it was this far in.
It's this far in. It's half
but you can't do that with an ebook because it lacks the physicality for you to attach those memories to.
Your abstraction is completely. It's a percentage pages abstraction. It's an abstraction that has no reference in physical form.
Yeah, and so one of the things that I've been the most disappointed with ebooks is the fact that they don't realise that you cannot make up for that lack of physicality by replicating pseudo-physicality using images and crap. You need to do that using uniquely digital features and user interface features that help you remember, that help you navigate, that help you organise your reading. And none of them do that. Even the best of them, don't even come close to using best practices from user interface design.
Well, and this is one of my other. This podcast is going to become a series of things that annoy Tom. Which
but at least it's not the series of things that annoy me.
Well, that's
because
true.
that was a huge risk.
That's always a huge risk. Yeah, I'm going to lead on the things that annoy me. One of the is this notion of remediation, which Baldur and Tom, God bless them, wrote a book in, I want to say 96. I think it was 1996 or 2006. I'm just wrong. That set out remediation as a way of thinking about digital media.
Yeah.
And their book does a much better job than I can ever do describing it. But remediation for me comes from a kind of a McLuhanite kind of notion that the content of every medium is another medium.
Yeah.
And that's a whole other topic of conversation. But essentially, what we had with early digital systems was a sense of remediating, of not even transforming, but kind of reappropriating the ways in which we engage with moving image, with text, with a whole set of things, and packaging them all together in this thing that was these boxes that were advertised as the medium that will eat every other medium, and they absolutely did. They remediated everything, but it seems that. And this is maybe my take on what you just said. That kind of notion that the ebooks as a cultural technological phenomenon have kind of ignored an awful lot. Or just misread, maybe not ignored, even misread a whole lot of cues from the book and cues from the way we read is they're remediating what books do. They're not trying to do what they should be doing. And this comes back to my thinking. They can't do what print can.
Yeah, because that's impossible.
And that's what print does. And they should be trying to find out what can they do that is... What can they offer a reading experience, a reader, a set of readers, whatever that thing might be, that is kind of unique, a set of unique affordances to a digital experience, to a digital reading experience, rather than, and I have no problem with the ebook market, it's fine, despite what I occasionally say. But rather than...
It's me who has the problem with the ebook market.
But rather than saying it's that this is good enough, that for me is that there is a sense in which what we've got is good enough, and what we've got is what we have, and it's there, and now we have to make the best of it. And for me, it is constantly about, no, this is not good enough, this can be better. Yeah. We can rethink the whole thing from the ground up if we had the guts to.
I mean, I've actually changed my opinion on this subject. I don't know whether it's recently, but it's not too far off in a distant past. In that, I actually don't think that the mistaken direction of ebooks, which the fact that the ebook market spent years just re-implementing PDFs from scratch using something else, just it's a symptom of how completely warped it is. But I actually come to the conclusion that none of that matters. It's completely unimportant because what happens is that something else will just come to take its place. whether it's websites or some sort of app thing or something, if there is a demand for a text-oriented medium for to address a specific problem or a specific need, it will be fulfilled eventually by something. And if ebooks are going to focus more on replicating the affordances of print instead of focusing on the needs of the readers, something else will come and address those needs.
Yeah.
And my bet is going to be either bunch of websites or an app. I mean, nobody in publishing has tried to address the needs of teenagers in terms of fan fiction. So Wattpad came and filled that.
Yeah.
And I think that sort of process is probably going to repeat itself over the next 10 years, one by one. We're just going to see, one by one, the big sectors of print publishing be taken over by something in digital that just isn't ebooks, because ebooks are too focused on replicating print. Yeah. So my opinion is that in the long run, it doesn't really matter. I mean, ebooks are really, really good for novels. From my perspective, if in 10 years' time, ebooks are still just mainly used for narrative prose with few illustrations, I'm fine with that, as long as the needs of the readers are being addressed somehow, somewhere, by something else. So, but then we've gone quite a far way off topic in that. What the hell are we going to call this thing?
True, we have, and there's one thing before we kind of get back on that, and we steer the runaway train bus that can't go above 40 miles an hour, which are the film references we're putting in now.
Rail replacement bus.
Hey, let's not mention that. They're horrible things. They're just there's an entire metaphor that we could run with about what's digital in rail replacement bus. Richard House's The Kills.
What's that then?
So, I think this is 2 years old, maybe 3 years old. Big, hefty novel. I'm sorry, I'm showing you a phone. There we go. It was shortlisted for the Booker. It's a very clever thing. It's a very nicely written thing. That sounds like I'm damning faint praise at the very start. It's not. It's a fine thing. But my kind of root problem with it, my root problem with the form and the structure and the way it was being written and the way it was kind of being composed, is it felt like, if we go back to my kind of little metaphor of a of a book kind of running along, and at some point the digital edition is hived off, it felt like, we now got this digital edition that's hived off. What else can we put into that to tell a story? Yeah. And it absolutely did things with telling the story. It completely, yes, it was a really clever piece of enhanced storytelling of the way he was using photography and using short pieces of video to get something across, to impart some sense of place or texture or character. And but at the heart of it, it was saying, okay, we're starting with this thing that is a copy of the print edition. I'm going to do something with it. And no matter how much I liked that book, and no matter how well it got reviewed, my disquiet was, actually, you're starting from the wrong point. But EMP is Arcadia, which Faber is putting out as an app edition and as a print edition. And apparently, this is the end of August when we're recording this, that the print edition has been available in some circles, if you know the right people, for a month or so. The digital edition, no idea. But from what I know about Pia's writing, that he is somebody who has actually gone back to first principles and said, okay, how do I tell a story, and how do I construct something that tells a story? Yeah. And from what I gather, he's working with Touch Press, who do terrific things. So maybe there's something in that by the time you're listening to this, that there is something that has appeared that does actually start to articulate that in, if not a mass market edition, is something that, and this for me is one of the other things, something that will get reviewed in The Guardian, that will be in London Review of Books, that there will be essays written about it. And maybe the essays will be written about the response to it. They'll be written about, how do you classify this thing? And they won't appear for 3 or 4 months after the thing's published. But at least there is a sense that they will exist. They will be a thing that is there, and that we can argue and we can articulate and we can kind of find a way around. Yeah.
I mean, it's sort of the risk that you always run with... it's kind of the if people talk about it when it comes out, it's probably not going to mean a thing in terms of the field or changing things. If people ignore it when it comes out and it starts building up a discussion, sort of as more and more people discover it, then you've probably got something that's doing something interesting. Yeah. So it's sort of like It's like they say with startups, is that the startup that has the biggest, most bangiest launch is probably the one that's going to sink like a stone, and the startups that build up and then start skyrocketing later on, they're the ones that you want to look out for.
Yeah.
Mainly because it's sort of it comes back to one of the things that sort of we referred to several times in the book, like object thing that we've we've been writing about iteration. In that I'm always skeptical about somebody who, because the idea of throwing out a completed work into and releasing it, publishing it into and then it being discussed afterwards is it's an echo of the print way of doing things. It works sometimes. I mean, for a lot of projects, you just can't do it out of the way. But it's always has a bit of the risk of, it's a huge gamble. That's what I'm saying. That if you were like sitting down and working on a thing for 3 or 4 years, then and just having one single artifact to throw out into the world, it's a huge gamble. You're gambling 3 or 4 years of work on a single event.
This I think. I mean, this is a much longer topic of conversation. This is why one of the things that's happened in digital and in digital's response to publishing, and Mike Bashkar, formerly Profile, now Canelo, has done a huge amount of work looking at this and kind of tracking it, is adaptations of existing works, of taking an existing piece of work and saying, how can we deal with that? How can we make that? I don't want to say how can we digital it, because that's we address this. The very, very brilliant Claire Reddington addresses this, and she addresses it in a talk. We said if someone asks you to digital anything, then walk out of the room.
Yeah,
get paid, but walk out of the room. I think that's what she said. She'll soon tell me, but I think it's easier to take something like Frankenstein or something like Around the World in 80 Days to name two things that have been done very, very, very well. And I'm not in any way kind of denigrating or casting score on this. They've done, but to take something that exists in the mind of a reader already, in the mind of a publisher, in the mind of a reader and a marketing department, and say, okay, we can make a digital edition of this. We can make something that feels like that. And that for me is the huge risk that Faber are taking with Arcadia, if it works in any way, shape or form, is to take something that doesn't have that legacy, doesn't have that kind of sense of knowingness about it, and do something with it.
Yeah.
And it's the reason that at the moment we're Circumstance are making small pieces.
Yeah.
And we've just very painfully had to say no to somebody who wrote an astonishing, really brilliant, really clever piece of spy fiction, and to go back to first principles because it's too big.
Yeah.
It's trying to make this work as a novella, because it's not a novel, it's not that big, but actually without knowing that the short story equivalent works, without knowing that the moment works, and that you're not simply dealing with novelty. Because that's the other problem with this whole field, is that there is a sense of novelty about it, there is a sense of newness that actually gets people very excited. And Touch Press and Faber's The Wasteland is novelty for me. It's a novelty in the way it's presented. It's a very, very clever thing. It's a very smart piece of marketing and a smart piece of assembly. But it kind of comes and goes for me. Maybe I'm not an A-level student or GCSE student studying The Wasteland who would find that idea that you've got kind of the Cliff's Notes alongside Ezra Pound's annotations, alongside iterations of the original text, alongside readings, useful. I find it novel. I find it interesting. I look at it and I go, wow. And I show students it and they go, wow. But it's not a thing that has, for me, it's not something that kind of argues anything, because it's not trying to do something new. It's just trying to kind of repackage a whole set of things. And it does it really successfully, but it's not striking out. It's not this, sorry, to come back to where we were, seems like days ago now. It's not the avant-garde. It's not actually something that feels like it's carving out territory almost for the sake of carving it out, of trying to figure out something that we didn't know before.
Yeah. I mean, sort of harkening back to the Wasteland example you used, novelty is meaningful in and of itself.
Yeah.
But it's not sustainable. You can't use that as a tactic for your digital media projects long term, because you're going to run out. It's a non-renewable resource. You're going to run out of new things for that specific medium.
Yeah.
So you need to discover what structures, what methods, and what tactics work for that medium in and of themselves. And that takes exploration, that takes starting from small bits and building out. Because you can't rely on novelty in the long term. And frankly, we're in 2015, and digital media. If you date it back to the first Mac, we're talking about 30 years. We are running out of novelty. I mean, a lot of the things that have gained word of mouth within the publishing sphere has only been able to do that because it was novel to people in publishing who were completely ignorant about the history of interactive media. It's only novel to them.
Yeah.
And when even they're going to see that this thing is novel, that's going to run out. You're going to need to figure out something new. And the second thing that I sort of want to highlight in terms of the wasteland was that I have a very specific philosophy of education, and that is, it's radical now. It used to be mainstream 100 years ago. I mean, it's sort of. I'm of the same opinion of John Dewey when he in Democracy and Education, when he wrote about the idea. The reason why we're doing public education is because we want to create better citizens. That's a contract between society that's paying for education and the students who are getting the free education. Is that we're doing this so that you're better at being citizens for society. And the core part of that is that learning is a process of discussion. It's a discussion with the other students and a discussion with the teacher. And it's the best illustration of this tactic for education has been a series of experiments that Bob Stein has been doing, where he created basically book-like spaces online where a class could read together a text and discuss it with each other. The smarter kids could explain to the other slightly slower kids and what things meant. The people who got one bit could explain it to those who didn't. And the teacher was there as a mediator, as a control for the discussion. But the book was brought into the digital space as a location for discussion, as a location for debate and education. And the Wasteland completely ignores that. It is a lecture object. It is basically telling you this is the way things are. This is what the poem means. These are the evidence for that meaning.
These are the important things that you need to understand in order to get this. But there's no dialogue in. Yeah, you're right.
No, as far as I'm concerned, that isn't an education object. That isn't useful to students. It's useful to teachers because they can basically just push responsibility for teaching onto a device, but it's not useful to students. It's really nice for readers who like evidence of history. So I'm not saying that it isn't valuable. It is. It's just not valuable in the same way people think it is. It's like I just really can't believe that the publishing industry hasn't snapped up Bob Stein years ago to put him in charge of some major project department. It's like. I can never understand that.
I'm completely Bob. I mean, in a way, for anybody who doesn't know Bob Stein, Bob has been working at this for longer than you and I have been out of secondary education.
He's been working on this so long, and he's such a pioneer. You wouldn't have DVDs with extras if he hadn't basically invented them before the DVD existed.
Yeah, absolutely. And in a way, one of the things that kind of marks Bob's card is Voyager. Kind of
and the Criterion Collection.
And the Criterion Collection but also a kind of a set of assumptions around the failure of that, or the failure of Voyager, the failure of kind of Dorling Kindersley kind of investment in digital, into CD-ROMs in the early 90s, that actually is not down to Bob. It's down to a bubble, and it's down to a whole set of things. You're fundamentally what we have there is an absolute genius, an absolute pioneer who is underemployed.
Yeah, which is just
underappreciated.
Criminal.
Yeah, it is. It's completely criminal. And if anyone has a budget, just ring Bob Stein up and get him to work on something, because you will get something you didn't know you wanted.
Yeah, exactly.
But anyway,
what are we going to call this thing?
I'm not sure we're actually any closer. We could call it "This Is Not the Future of the Book."
Oh, I actually like that.
Which is kind of, I could have said that 45 minutes ago.
But you're keeping that back because you're showing off.
No, I didn't. No, it just didn't occur to me. There's a really wonderful thing, and I don't have it to hand because it's in the office at work. That's called Print Is Not. I don't think it's called Print Is Not Dead, or The Book Is Not Dead, but it's a book written from the point of view that the internet has been around forever, and that print is a new thing coming along.
Oh, okay.
And it completely turns that whole argument on its head, and it presents it through work. It presents through a set of arguments and a set of work and a set of things around that. But maybe this is definitely a topic for a different conversation, a different time. But that notion that a lot of what we do is we talk about digital as being new, and we talk about digital as being a phenomenon, a novelty, and something we've just done. But actually, what we're talking about are things that go back to principles of play, principles of experience, principles of what we do as human beings in relation to stories, narrative, literature, however you want to kind of cast that. And they're not new at all. They have been around for a long time, which doesn't give me an answer to your question. What do we call this?
Well, I think preliminary title. This is not the future of the book.
I think this is not. Let's just say this is not the future of the book, and let's call it that for the moment, and see where we go. And if we change it in 3 weeks' time, and people get confused and iTunes banners, then that's fine.
Fair enough.